welcome to the next session. We have Demilade, who's joining us from Ireland. And what's really special about this session is she was actually the only one, if I can remember correctly, that really just wanted to talk about like purely data dilemma and data protection and security. So I'm really looking forward to it, especially because you're going to take a little bit like the Gen Z perspective. So thank you for coming, and I will pass to you, Demilade.
Of course, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. As Angeline said, my name is Demilade, and this session is focused on data protection, convenience, and security. I'm currently a trainee lawyer at a corporate law firm in Dublin, Ireland. I'm hoping to specialize in technology law at the end of my training contract. As Angeline mentioned, I'm a card carrying member of Gen Z, so really passionate about the role we can play in data and how much data affects our daily lives. Prior to working as a trainee lawyer, I worked as a data protection consultant to private and public sector organizations, developed really valuable skills in policy writing, stakeholder engagement, and advocacy. During university, I freelanced with startups and interned with innovative tech companies, typically in their legal or privacy teams. And so I'm passionate both about data protection and about innovation. And I'm hoping to explore this data dilemma of innovation versus data protection security with you all in today's session. So thank you again for joining. So to set the scene on understanding your data and digital footprint, we'll talk about what data is and a Gen Z morning in the life with data. We'll then move on to convenience and the data dilemma. And we'll move on also to a GDPR 101. We'll talk about not just the legislation you've heard of briefly, but the key rights you can exercise under that legislation. And we'll finish off with data protection playbook. So we'll put together some actionable steps you can take after becoming more data conscious through the session. Understanding your data and your digital footprint. To set the context for this talk, it'll be helpful to get a better understanding of data. So, what is data? The Irish Data Protection Commission explains that personal data can be understood as any information about a living person, whether that person is identified or could be identified. Before I give you some examples of personal data in the next slide, can you share in the chat 3 pieces of personal data you think that companies collect about you? So let's see if there's any responses in the chat. Examples of personal data. That's great. So Erica's coming with email address, date of birth, full name, and location. So yes, that can definitely be considered personal data. Spending habits in detail. Address, yes, definitely spending habits is something we've all gotten very used to. A lot of banking app these days actually create, insights and notifications about your spending habits, telling you, you spend most of your money on entertainment, you spend most of your money on takeouts. We also have your company role and again, ad interactions is very popular. Shopping habits, so what you search for. So again, I always get targeted with shopping ads are just perfect for what I'm searching for on a daily basis. So it seems like this group has a really good understanding of personal data. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So some examples of personal data, and I think we mentioned all of these, include your name, your email address, and your IP address. Under the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, which we'll discuss in more detail later on in this talk, there are some special categories of personal data that require additional protection. So these special categories of personal data include personal data revealing racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religious or philosophical belief, trade union membership, genetic data, and biometric data processed for the purpose of uniquely identifying a natural person, data concerning health, and data concerning a natural person's sex life or sexual orientation. You can probably imagine why these special categories of data require additional protection. It's often, the topic of a lot of controversy and can really impact a person's ability to live a private life. On the flip side, your digital footprint is the trail of information that you leave behind online when navigating between your favorite apps, websites, and online games. Now that we have some context for understanding data, I'd like to emphasize how deeply data is intertwined in our lives by walking you through a morning in the life of Gen Z, where trade offs between convenience and data protection are present. So, let me know in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. What's the first app you open every morning on your phone when you wake up? Mine would probably be Gmail or LinkedIn, maybe, because I'm constantly behind on my emails and LinkedIn messages. So I'm trying to get in the habit of just taking that off first thing in the morning. So Brona's saying here it's Instagram. Anyone else have thoughts on their first apps? Erica's like me, Gmail, LinkedIn. We have WhatsApp and Instagram as well. Email too. Snapchat, Bible app. Okay, interesting. Any more first app when you wake up in the morning? The news as well. Okay, brilliant. Weather. Okay, that's a good one actually, especially living somewhere like Ireland where the weather can be so unpredictable. That's a good one to have first thing in the morning. So as some of you may see by those comments there, we're all using apps or websites first thing in the morning that do collect our data. But to give you a better idea of how much we interact with data in just one morning as Gen Z, I'm going to walk you through a scenario of a morning in the life. So you wake up in the morning and your alarm is blaring. You go on your social media app of choice to check whether you have any unread messages. You scroll through your feed to like some funny videos and share the videos with your friends in your group chat. On the back end, data is being generated on your behavioral patterns so that the algorithms can provide personalized recommendations on posts to push to your feed and potentially influence the advertising sent your way. So you've just missed your bus because you spent a bit too long looking for your leap card, which you've replaced for the third time this week. So you have to get a taxi in the office instead of taking the bus, or you'll be late. So you open your trusty taxi app, which already has your card details saved and your office location saved. This saves you some time in terms of ordering your taxi to the office. You order the taxi to the office, and in the back end, while you're in the taxi, location tracking data is being shared with the taxi app provider, as well as your payment details. This location data is tracked throughout your journey and may be stored later to improve app analytics down the line. This location data may be tracked for months or even years. And while you're in the taxi, you're really happy that the location data is being shared because it kind of gives you an estimate of what time you get to the office. You can share with your boyfriend or your friends to let them know your location. You can tell your boss that you're just 10 minutes away. So you are really happy that location data is being shared, but it is worth thinking about how long that data is being shared and what that data is being used for. Once you get to the office, you grab a coffee and you work hard on researching and preparing slides for your upcoming presentation at the end of the week. Throughout your presentation preparation process, you use generative AI tools to help you brainstorm, type up some notes, and jump on calls with people to provide updates on your progress. In the background, data is being generated on your productivity as the content data is shared with various work apps and platforms. Okay. So you can see there is a lot of data being shared throughout that journey in just one morning on your way to work. And I'd be really curious, would you like to raise your hand or even drop an emoji into the chat if you've ever used generative AI for your work or study? Let's see how many of us. I can definitely say I've used generative AI for my work or study. So I have a fire emoji in the chat just there. Some thumbs up are coming through as well. Some generative AI users. And it seems like quite a large proportion of us are using generative AI in our worker study based on these responses and the love hearts and thumbs up coming through. But I wonder, do we ever think about where the prompting data goes? So when you're putting documents into your generative AI tool or you're giving more context as to what you're asking the AI tool to do you think about where that data is going, how much the AI tool knows about you? Again, it might be more convenient for the AI tool to know more about you or have more of this personal data about you so you can get your work done quicker, but is it worth that trade-off? So now we're going to talk about the convenience and data protection dilemma in more detail to kind of get us thinking even more about that trade-off. And I have another question for you. As you can tell, this session is very interactive. It's really about understanding your experience with data and kind of getting us being more data conscious because I feel like a lot of the time we are a bit passive about the data that is being processed about us or data that we're consuming. So just get us thinking about data more. If you had to choose between an app that remembers your preferences but collects all your data and one that collects nothing but requires you to enter data manually each time, which would you pick? So to make that a bit more concrete, if you had an app, for example, like your food delivery app, if it remembered all your personal details, so remembered your favorite order, it remembered your card details, remembered your email, remembered your address, and all you had to do was click one button for your favorite food to be delivered to your house, would you prefer that app or would you prefer an app that required you to enter your name, your email address, your favorite order, your payment details, everything each time? Which would you pick? Just get us thinking. So feel free to drop that in the chat or have a think about it. But a lot of the time, we do choose convenience over our data protection. This is completely understandable because we do live in a world where personalization is a standard, and manual processes like writing in details at each point of sign in can seem very tedious. The aim of this talk isn't to advocate giving up personalization or convenience completely, but to hopefully leave you feeling a bit more data conscious and ensure that you're making conscious trade offs. And I'd like to get a bit more of your insight and your experiences throughout the session as well. So if anything comes to mind or any comments or thoughts, please feel free to drop them in the chat. So while you're thinking about trade-offs that you've made or dropping them instead, I'd like to chat about Spotify Wrapped. So last December, like everybody else, I was proudly sharing my Spotify Wrapped stats. I'm a top 1% listener to Ali Abdal's Deep Dive podcast, and Afrobeats is consistently my top genre on Spotify. If you don't listen to Rema, Davido, or Olamide already, you need to start today. Take that away. So, for those of you who aren't familiar, Spotify Wrap provides a recap of all the content a Spotify user has consumed over the past year, from music to audiobooks to podcasts, and lets them know information like what their listening mood is, who their top artist is, and what they had on repeat that year. To create Spotify Wrapped every year, Spotify tracks your listening habits, including what you listen to, how long you listen to it, what time of day you listen, and even when you skip a song. For the first time, Spotify Wrapped also included an AI generated podcast powered by Google's Notebook LM, which featured two hosts discussing the user Spotify Wrap results, nodding towards our AR powered future. This wasn't there before. I'll have a look through the chat now to see if there are any responses for the earlier question. And yeah, people are commenting about their preferences for an app that shares their details or saves their details or one that requires them to include things manually. And it seems like most people do prefer to have an app that saves their details and they don't have to put everything in manually. That just shows us the data protection and convenience trade off. So, several platforms like Spotify and other tools we use present useful insights in our behavior. So, you can think about your Apple Watch tracking your steps for the day, Duolingo letting you know your unique learning style, and Netflix providing you with personalized recommendations on what to learn next, on what to binge next. Learning might be a bit of a strong word for Netflix. But yeah, Apple Watch, Duolingo, and Netflix, they do provide us with useful insights. And I don't know about you, but I often look at these recommendations and think that these tools or these apps or these websites or platforms know me better than I know myself. All these insights are powered by analysis of our data, and we ourselves might not actually analyze our data. So maybe that's why it seems like they know us better than we know ourselves. And I think it is fair to say that these insights are great for convenience, whether it's supporting a fitness journey by telling you how many steps you're averaging a day, preparing for a trip to Spain by helping you understand your learning style on an app, or saving time browsing through Netflix million and one categories. They can be really useful. But as much as data driven insights can be convenient, they can potentially raise some data protection, privacy, and security issues. Laws like the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, help us navigate this landscape. The GDPR is very widely applicable because it applies to any companies or entities which process personal data as part of the activities of its business or branches established in the EU, regardless of where the data is processed, and any companies established outside the EU offering its goods or services for cost or for free or monitoring the behavior of individuals in the EU. So, for example, if there's a company in America that monitors the behavior of people in the EU or sells things to people in the EU, the GDPR will be applicable to them too. So, it is a very worldwide regime. That does help us. So, moving on to our next slide, our GDPR 101. Great. So you may have heard of the GDPR colloquially as the law that means you have to see a pop-up asking whether you want to accept cookies on a website, or the law that causes the eager event photographer to ask your permission before photographing you for social media posts. The GDPR isn't just about cookie banners and how you feel about off-guard pictures. It's a really useful law to get your head around because it gives you a lot of rights that can aid your data protection skills and consciousness. Today, I'll break down some of these rights to help you as you navigate your data literacy journey. So, some key rights that you have under the GDPR include the right of access, the right to be informed, the right to rectification, the right to erasure, and rights in relation to automated processing. The Article 15 right of access allows you to request a copy of your personal data being processed. This is known as a data subject access request or a DSAR. I did my first DSAR when I took a module in college called Data Security and Privacy from the School of Computer Science. So if I haven't mentioned it earlier, I did a law degree. So it was a really great opportunity to kind of take a degree or take a degree course from a different school. And that was my first interaction with data security. As part of the course, we're assessed in our ability to make a DSAR. So as I'll discuss a bit later, I would recommend doing a DSAR at some point. So you can make a data subject access request for your favorite social media apps like LinkedIn and Snapchat by emailing their corporate data protection offices. So that's what we would have done when we're in university doing this for our assignment. And sometimes platforms have in-app features that allow you to download a limited archive of the data the platform has on you. So if you navigate to the settings section of your favorite apps or websites, sometimes it does have an option to download your personal data, but you can take that a step further by emailing their corporate offices for a full DSAR. Performing a DSAR can be a very useful exercise for becoming more literate in and conscious about the data being collected about you online. And I think doing my first DSAR actually changed my life because it just did not occur to me that these platforms were recording everything you did, like the searches you make, the time you make the searches, how many times you make the searches. They compile their assumptions about you. So they might assume that you're a young professional, or they might assume that you're based in a different country you might not be based in. So it is really interesting how that data is compiled, and I would recommend doing one. I'll just pause here to ask whether anyone in the call today has ever requested their data before from a platform. Has anyone else completed a DSAR before? If you haven't, would you be interested in doing one? So Yvette says she hasn't yet. So I've encouraged one person to try out a DSAR. Anyone else planning on doing one or has done one before? Oh, someone's done one for Snapchat years ago when they figured out that they could do that. So again, even Snapchat gives you that option. No, but definitely would be interested in public health records, for example. Exactly, yes. No, but they're going to do it now. Sorry in advance for the trove of people sending data protection officers way. But I do think it is a useful exercise because you can kind of hear all the theory in the world about data protection security, but it's not until you see it right in front of you that you understand just how much data you are sharing on a daily basis. Okay, moving on. Another key right you have in the GDPR is the right to be informed under Articles 13 and 14. Organizations are required to let you know in easily accessible and easy to understand language that they are processing your data and how your data should be used. So it should be obvious that your data is being processed. So, for example, when you join this webinar, you'd have been shown a notice that the webinar is going to be recorded and given some more information about that. So, organizations are required to inform you about your data processing. The right to rectification under Articles 16 and 19 of the GDPR empowers you to have your data rectified or fixed if the data a data controller, like an organization, has on you is inaccurate. There are a lot of situations where this can be really useful in practice. For example, imagine you signed up for a buy now, pay later service and you shared your personal details over the phone. Because of this, they took down your date of birth wrong because they didn't understand your accent or they misheard you. And when you try to use the buy now, pay later service a few months down the line to get a new iPhone after your iPhone broke, you were unable to do this because you were marked as being underage for the service. The right to rectification would allow you to reach out to the service to rectify your date of birth that was recorded on the service website or the service records. The right to erasure is the right to be forgotten under Articles 17 and 19 of the GDPR allows you to request for your data to be deleted. Although it isn't a blanket right and there are some grounds where it won't be applicable, such as for research purposes, legal obligations, or health reasons, it's a useful one to have in your back pocket if you are no longer interested in a service provider storing your data. And finally, with AI capturing every tech headline at the moment, the Article 22 right not to be subject to a decision based solely on automated processing is a very hot topic. This right prevents decisions from being made without any human intervention and where it produces legal effects or significantly affects you. So automated processing is only allowed where you've provided your solely automated processing is only allowed where you've expressed your consent, where it's necessary for the performance of a contract, or when authorized by European Union or member state law. Even when automated processing occurs within these exceptions, the GDPR protects your data by these requiring that there are suitable measures in place to safeguard your rights, freedoms, and legitimate interests. So the GDPR has got your back. I really hope that this whistle stop tour of the GDPR was helpful. Understanding your rights under the GDPR puts you in a much better position to protect yourself and make informed choices about your personal data. So now we're moving on to a really interesting section, the Gen Z Data Protection Playbook. To recap, so far in this talk, I've spoken about what data is, how much data affects a day in the life of Gen Z, leading into some practical examples of how navigating data protection convenience can be a dilemma, and provide a one-on-one on the rights you have under the GDPR. So we've engaged a bit in the chat, and we've seen that people do have that trade-off of preferring that a website or an app saves their details, that people are interested now in doing a DSAR because they didn't realize you could do one, or people have done one in the past to kind of see how these apps and platforms are collecting their data. With all this in mind, I want the next part of the session to focus really on developing a playbook of practical steps you can take with your newfound data consciousness. Because again, as I said, it's really easy to hear the theory of why it's important to, protect your data. You should be safe online. You've heard it a million times, but we need to actually think about what we can do next after becoming a bit more conscious about it. So it isn't something we hear once and forget, but something we implement on a consistent basis. And even if it's just one thing you take away from the talk today, and it's just one action you do, you've kind of set yourself up for better data practices online. So the first one we're looking at is password habits. So everybody has a password. We've been using passwords since we were 6 years old, but a lot of us do have kind of negative data habits or password habits because of convenience. It's easier to remember one password, right? But better passwords are a great step to take in protecting your data online. While the temptation is high to use and reuse your passwords consistently, your data is definitely more at risk if you're using the same passwords across different websites. It's important to avoid using the same password for more than two websites. So, what do I mean by better passwords? Better passwords can look like creating strong, unique passwords, which are a combination of numbers, letters, and special characters. You've probably heard that before. Now you'll see on websites when you're creating an account, they'll often ask you to include a minimum of XYZ special characters or XYZ numbers and letters. And that's definitely a better step forward for creating better passwords. If you haven't heard of it before, WebWise is the Irish Internet Safety Awareness Centre, and it is really applicable no matter how old you are, even though it does focus on youth. So it's the Irish Safety Awareness Centre and provides information, advice, and resources for schools, families, and young people on online safety and digital citizenship. They provide some really useful tips for creating strong passwords and just other things you might need to know about as you navigate your digital literacy journey. So the first tip that WebWise gives is around password length. So when you create an account, they'll often ask you to have an account password that has a minimum of 8 characters, but Webwise recommends that you go beyond this and have a minimum of 10 characters in your passwords where numbers, letters, and special characters are components of this password. They also advise against using dictionary words like house, dog, or mouse, and advise against using common phrases. So one of the most popular passwords in the world is password 123. So again, avoid common phrases like that. And finally, WebWise advocates for unpredictability in passphrases by having gibberish passwords or even having passphrases where the first or last words in a given sentence are used as letters and some special characters are thrown in. So if you didn't catch that, the website is WebWise and they give advice on digital citizenship for young people and give advice on safety and security online. Okay, so a practical action you can take from today's session is reviewing your existing passwords and identifying any that are weak or excessively reused. So, as I mentioned earlier, you shouldn't be using the same password across more than two websites. It's quite straightforward to review your existing saved passwords in your iPhone by entering the settings app on your iPhone and scrolling down to passwords. Similarly, you can review your saved passwords on your web browser. So, if you use Chrome like I do, you can select the three dots in the top right corner of your screen and select passwords and autofill and then Google Password Manager, and that will show you your saved passwords on your browser. If you don't use an iPhone or a Google Chrome browser, I'd really recommend looking into what the equivalent steps are for your browser and your device. So again, the practical action you can take from this password habit section is reviewing your existing passwords, seeing which ones you're using over time, going on your phone and seeing what saved passwords are on your phone, and going in your browser to see what saved passwords are on your browser. Now, two-factor authentication. So, two-factor authentication is becoming a really big part of our lives and helps with our data security. I'm a very big fan of it. Two-factor authentication is where there's a two-step process in verifying your identity, and this helps protect your accounts from being accessed even if somebody else has your passwords. I think more and more of us are getting used to two-factor authentication now, because this extra layer of protection can look like an email being sent to you to confirm whether it was you trying to access your account, or it can look like a text being sent to your phone number to confirm a banking purchase. So you might have already seen examples of two-factor authentication. It can be inconvenient sometimes swapping back and forth between apps and tabs, but it is a really great step for data protection and data security to have two-factor authentication being set up. And actually, you can take right now is reviewing your most commonly used apps and websites and seeing whether you have two-factor authentication set up. And if not, you can set that up even if it is optional. And I think iPhones, for example, are making it easier to comply with two-factor authentication because, you can easily copy and paste the codes that it sends to you. So yeah, that's an easy step you can take for two-factor authentication. And feel free to drop any thoughts on that in the chat. I see Brona has mentioned it's very useful since its introduction. So yeah, listen to Brona's thoughts. It is very useful since its introduction. Okay, VPNs. On to our next slides. So VPNs are virtual private networks, and public Wi-Fi at restaurants, hotels, and shops can be very convenient. It saves you some money because you're not using your own mobile data. But if you're really fond of using public Wi-Fi, VPNs can be a really useful tool for you to leverage. And let's talk about why in today's session. The UK's National Cybersecurity Centre, I'll say that again in case you want to look them up. The UK National Cybersecurity Centre in their device security guidance, describe VPNs as encrypted network connections, guaranteeing the security of data in transit. This is beneficial because bad actors with access to your unprotected data on those public Wi-Fi networks, and you've probably heard it before that be careful of public Wi-Fi because of bad actors. So bad actors with access to your unprotected data on these networks may be able to intercept and modify your data, potentially causing you harm, and we don't want that for you. So if you're writing your password details or you're putting in your payment details, bad actors can intercept that, and VPNs can help with this. Practically, in terms of steps you can take from this part of the session, you might want to set aside time to research and compare VPN options and get into a practice of turning on a VPN when you're using public networks because you don't want to be a victim to these attacks. Moving on to reviewing app permissions. As we touched on earlier, apps often have permissions enabled like location sharing, camera access, sharing your phone contacts, and tracking activity across different apps. Protecting and safeguarding your data is a right you have, and I would really encourage you to exercise that right. Don't be afraid to limit your in app permissions, and the default of accepting the permissions presented to you might not be suitable for your needs or your preferences, especially after you've done your DSARs and seen what you are sharing. So feel free to limit those permissions. And even if the platform is persistent in asking you to share the permissions, you don't have to share them if the option app is still functional. The Irish Data Protection Commission provides a checklist for reviewing app permissions, which I would highly recommend you consider adopting. So, when downloading a new app, the DPC recommends that you check what happens to your personal data, which you should be told due to the transparency requirements we discussed earlier, and asking yourself whether the app does need that permission it's requesting of you. It then recommends being really mindful of which access you're giving apps when downloading them to your device and making sure that you do not provide any personal information until you fully understand and are satisfied with how the data will be used. The DPC advises to review your access permissions in the settings app of your device. And if you're not satisfied with those app permissions in the settings app of your device, consider uninstalling the app or refusing the permission or restricting the permission the app has access to. So again, on your phones, it is really easy to access your app permissions on your settings, and I would recommend that you check those out. Last last things now, the data protection policy review. So this is my bread and butter, but I do understand that it can feel intimidating to review a data protection policy if you've never done so before. But a lot of organizations are doing great work to make data protection policies seem more accessible. And the policies that we'll take a look at today are the SurveyMonkey Privacy Basics policy, the Lego Information for Kids Child Friendly Privacy Information, and the Typeform Plain English version of their privacy policy. So if we move on to the next slide for SurveyMonkey. Hopefully you can see that, but at the top of the screen, you'll see that SurveyMonkey has privacy basics, and they're essentially explaining or caveating that the full privacy notice can be accessed at that link, but this is a basic version of their privacy policy. So if we move to the next slide, we can see a comparison. So when I was an intern at SurveyMonkey, my fellow intern and the wider privacy legal team and I worked on creating this privacy basics page for our privacy policy. The privacy basics page distilled a longer form privacy notice into a more concise version with key points. And you kind of see that there's a focus on educating the user versus giving them information. So in the top right hand side, you can see a special cookie statement. We use cookies, pixels, and similar technologies, as we've said above. The technology can help us make sure that you're seeing only advertising relevant to you. However, there's a lot about the world of cookies online that needs to improve. We encourage you to inform yourself about your rights in this area and to actively engage with cookie tools and websites to ensure that you're expressing your preferences. We've worked hard to improve our preference management of cookies on our sites, but it's important to manage these preferences all across the internet too. Just depending on your geographic location, you can withdraw your consent to our use of non-essential cookies by interacting with our in-product cookie preference tool. So again, they're informing you there that you do have rights about cookies, that they're trying to improve their preference management system, and there's a lot about the world of cookies online that needs to improve, and they're encouraging you to inform yourself. Versus the longer form privacy notice, it's a bit more focused on the legal aspects. And here it says you can choose to remove or disable cookies, and depending on your location, you can withdraw consent to non-essential cookies in the cookie preference tool. So they are trying to make the privacy policy more accessible by having this privacy basics page. And moving on to the next policy, so in the Lego privacy policy, they have a whole section dedicated to information for kids. So again, Lego is clearly trying to make privacy policies more accessible and shows that no matter your age, you do have a right to have a say in your personal data and understand your personal data rights. So I've put a really memorable section of the policy in the bottom left. So the question is in the policy under information for kids, do I have a say in what happens to my personal data? And the answer is yes, you do. You have what we call rights when we use your data. One of these is the right to know what we do with it, and that's what this page is for. You can ask us to tell you what personal data we have about you, or you can tell us to stop using it or delete it. If your personal data is wrong or incorrect, you can tell us and we will fix it. The rights you have will depend on what we use your data for, and there's a lot more information in the privacy policy. Please ask an adult to help you read it. Well, make sure you follow all the rules. We have someone at the Lego group called our data protection officer, and their job is to protect your data. This means that they will make sure we're following all the rules and that your data is safe. If they see something wrong, they will tell us how we can fix it. So I think that is very endearing. And lastly, we have type forms. So again, they ask people which version of the privacy policies they want to see, the legal jargon filled version or the plain English version. And no, you're reading the plain English version, which is not legally binding. And advise again, you can read the full text legal jargon filled version that's legally binding. So again, although these policies are very accessible, they do point you back to the legal version, but is a nice introduction into data privacy policies if you're reading them for the first time. So, to recap on today's session and kind of finish us off here, I would like to say thank you, first of all, for joining and making that first step towards data consciousness. And I hope that you leave feeling more data conscious. And I'm not just making that assumption. Please do let me know if you're feeling a bit more data conscious, a bit more equipped to kind of take charge of how you interact with data. You understand a bit more how convenience can be ranked above data protection and security in your day-to-day life and the key rights that are provided under the GDPR. Importantly, I hope you now have an awareness of different steps you can take to enhance your data practices. So these include developing better password practices, switching on two-factor authentication, using VPNs on public networks, reviewing your in-app permissions, and getting started with reading data protection policies, maybe even looking at the plain text policies as a start. I'd really love to hear how you get on with becoming more data conscious. So please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, drop me a message to keep me posted, and let me know if you have any questions. I think we still have a bit of time if anyone has any questions or thoughts or comments. I would love to hear them. Thank you all so much for this engagement. Really glad that this was useful. Thank you.
Amazing. What an engaging way to present data. Really, it was really nice. The Lego has my very favorite data privacy video. So anyone who hasn't seen their video for kids about data privacy, this is for me the best that exists. So yeah, they're great. I think they're really a standard. Yeah.
I'll have to look into that. I haven't seen it yet,
Oh,
so
you haven't seen? Oh, I just made a nice gift to you. The Lego data privacy video is just fun. So wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for the engagement.
thank you. Erica's just dropped a quick question
Mhm.
there. What attracted you to data privacy? Was it when the GDPR became more prominent? So during my first internship, I was at a big US healthcare company and I worked across a few different legal functions. And I really grew a liking to the commercial aspect of things. I think I'm quite an entrepreneurial person. So when an opportunity came up the following summer to work at a tech company, my manager was actually the head of privacy. And because I was working a lot with her, I kind of got to see the exciting things people were working on, but also people who are passionate about keeping privacy at the center while creating innovative tools. So I think that's what drew me to GDPR and data protection. And I think also doing that module in university where I had to do a DSAR, that got me very concerned and conscious about what data was being processed and got me more careful about what I'm putting into any apps or websites that I use. So I think a combination of just having a great manager and great legal internship experiences and doing that DSAR for myself got me into data protection. I'm really glad I'm here. Okay. Thanks again. And I think, are we ready to log off now?
Yeah, you did great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again for inviting me. I really enjoyed this. Thanks all. Bye bye. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the conference.